Joining me now, we have Margaret Donovan, former U.S. Army officer and captain in the JAG Corps and visiting lecturer at Yale Law. Welcome, Margaret. So, President Trump met with top aides yesterday to decide whether to intensify these military assaults on Iran and told reporters he is locked and loaded. We heard that. He just told this French journalist that he would consider resuming a full-scale war with Iran, quote, if we don't get 100% of what we want. Do you suspect this is a calm before he makes his next move, or is it a sign that talks could be on a new track? I mean, is it about like forcing them with, I guess, such intense military action into submission?
No, Alex, I think the more relevant takeaway from all of that, I couldn't begin to pretend to know what the president is thinking. But the more relevant takeaway to me is that this underscores that this entire conflict from beginning to end has been entirely unconstitutional. We are now talking about the president just musing, basically, whether or not he wants to continue and extract an extended, protracted conflict. When the framers wrote the Constitution, war powers were shared in between Article 1 of the Constitution, which vests the power to declare war and the power to fund the military in the legislative branch. Article 2 of the Constitution, which establishes the executive branch, deemed the president to be the commander-in-chief. When the framers wrote the Constitution in Article 1, that verb, declare war, that was a very specific decision made by the framers at the Constitutional Convention. And it was important because they did not want a single person bringing the entire country into war. And that is exactly what you have here now. And to maybe help contextualize this a little bit, if you were to think of the two greatest attacks on the United States, over the most horrific attacks in the United States over the past century, you would think of Pearl Harbor and 9/11, right? Well, in both of those instances, Congress, after Pearl Harbor, declared war. And after 9/11, President Bush was in front of Congress 3 days later on September 14th, getting an authorization for use of military force. So I bring that up to say Congress still has not authorized this war. And the idea that the president is now just assuming that he can continue the war, that he can extend the war, that he can commit troops in a really aimless fashion, to me, this underscores the need for Congress to finally flex its muscle and act here.
Okay. Donald Trump said this week the U.S. will destroy one bridge or power plant each time Iran shoots at a ship in the Strait of Hormuz. He was asked about this on Friday. Let's listen to this.
A question about Iran. You're talking about blowing up civilian power plants and bridges. Much of the civilized world would consider that a war crime. Do you?
I won't respond to that question. Who are you with?
The New York Times.
I figured so. Failing New York Times.
Lovely. But as an officer, you advised targeting operations. So can you explain when an attack of this nature becomes a war crime? And is there a point making this type of threat that violates the Pentagon's own laws of war?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I was in the JAG Corps, as you mentioned. I've given advice on well over 1,000 airstrikes. My combat deployments were to Iraq and Syria. And there's very much in a situation or a set of situations where civilian infrastructure can be targeted. The default rule is that you are not targeting civilians, you are targeting an enemy force. But there very well may be scenarios where the enemy has basically taken control over a piece of civilian infrastructure, or it otherwise gives the U.S. military a definite military advantage. Or in some other way, the civilian object has lost its protected status. And in those instances, there is a case-by-case analysis. You are going target by target and deciding whether or not that is targetable under the DoD's own law of war policy and under the broader international law of armed conflict and the Geneva Conventions.
Before you even go for how complicated, how time-consuming is that process of making that determination? And are you confident this Pentagon is doing it?
Well, that's exactly the point, Alex. I mean, I think what we see here is the president basically saying, just pick one. Pick a power plant, pick a water treatment plant, pick a bridge, and we're just going to go and knock them off if I'm displeased with how negotiations are going. And that is not permitted under any analysis under the law of war or international law of armed conflict. So this idea that you can just arbitrarily choose a civilian object to retaliate because you're not getting the policy objectives that you're getting, that's not going to be permitted under any circumstances. Usually the analysis is quite deliberate, and it's a very serious and grave analysis to make, whether you're, in the middle of a fight in the strike cell or whether you're doing a more offensive and deliberately planned target.
So, from what you are saying, is it safe to assume that the U.S. military is conducting war crimes in their attacks on the civilian infrastructure if they have not been thoroughly vetted, if you will?
So it would be difficult to me to opine on whether anybody's committed a war crime without actually knowing the facts behind each strike. But if the fact pattern is the following: find a random civilian infrastructure in order to inflict harm on civilians so that we can achieve a non-military goal, yes, by most definitions, I would say that would be a war crime. The reason why I'm hedging here is because none of us know the full picture. None of us know exactly what whatever strike cell prosecuting these strikes is looking at. But certainly the facts that are provided to the public and the really bold statements made by the commander-in-chief do not instill faith, I think, in most people.
Well, there has been a lot of confusion out there, also anger after the Pentagon suddenly dropped the official death toll of U.S. service members from 18 to 14 on Wednesday. And a Pentagon spokesperson claimed the website underwent temporary data disruptions and it would be quickly fixed. It has not been fixed, by the way. Sources told The Times the removal was because 4 of the deaths occurred during what the president describes as a ceasefire. What do you make of this discrepancy? I mean, isn't the Pentagon legally required to publicly and accurately publish the death toll?
That's exactly right. The Pentagon is required to do that by law. I've been following that story, Alex, and I think it's so fascinating, the two versions of explanations that are coming out. If it is just a technical glitch, that's unfortunate, but thank you for acknowledging it and let's fix it. If it is truly that we are saying that people who died being sent to Iran by this administration will not be acknowledged as the war dead, that is, that's like a legal and military blasphemy in my mind. I think that's completely inexcusable. I'm going to, go out on a limb and give the administration the benefit of the doubt here. I realize the maybe folly in doing so, but I really hope that it is just a technical glitch and we are not actually not acknowledging the sacrifice that these people made and the purpose for which they made it, those responsible who are sending soldiers to their deaths. That is, to me, unforgivable.